A farmer's last prayer. In the dry northern plains of Ghana, where the red earth cracks beneath the weight of a merciless sun, survival itself feels like a daily battle. It was here that Kofi Tete first opened his eyes to a world where hope was a scarce harvest. His story did not begin with plenty, but with scarcity, with hunger, with endless toil on a land that seemed to mock his family's sweat. Kofi grew up in a small mud brick hut on the outskirts of Tamale. His earliest memories were not of toys or laughter, but of his father's weather-beaten hands, cracked, calloused, worn by years of pushing the hoe through stubborn earth. The land had been in their family for generations, yet no generation had truly conquered it. They grew millet, maize, and ground nuts, enough to live, but never enough to live well. His mother, a quiet woman with a gentle spirit, carried faith like a cloak. Every evening she would bow her head over a pot of watery porridge and whisper prayers. Tomorrow God will provide. Kofi, as a boy, often wondered why tomorrow never seemed to arrive. Hunger was not a stranger, it was family. It sat at their table, shared their food, and slept beside them at night. Then tragedy struck. His father died suddenly when Kofi was just 17. Overnight, the burden of manhood fell on his shoulders. His younger siblings, frightened and frail, looked to him for strength. His mother's weary eyes pleaded silently, "Do not let us fall apart." He promised, but inside he doubted. How could a boy, barely grown, be expected to feed a family when even a seasoned man like his father had struggled? Years rolled on, and Kofi grew into a man of quiet determination. He married Amma, a woman whose laughter, even in hardship, reminded him of rivers after the rain. Together they had 3 children. Their hut was filled with love, but their farm was filled with struggle. Kofi worked a small plot of land, no bigger than a football field. Each year he planted with hope, and each year the rains mocked him. Climate change had shifted the seasons. Some years the rains came late, other times not at all. Sometimes they came in floods, drowning the young seedlings before they could take root. In desperation, Kofi joined a local cooperative. They promised unity. They pooled money, shared equipment, and were supposed to divide government-subsidized fertilizer. For a brief moment, Kofi believed he had found brothers in the struggle. But greed is a stubborn weed. When fertilizer arrived one season, the leaders siphoned off the best portion and sold it in town for profit. What remained for farmers like Kofi was barely enough to cover a corner of his field. When Kofi questioned them, he was met with scorn. "Ah, Tete," one of the leaders sneered. "Perhaps you should pray harder. Maybe your God will rain fertilizer from heaven." The men laughed, their voices cutting sharper than the harmattan winds. Kofi said nothing, but that night, under the blanket of stars, he whispered a prayer. "God, do not let my children starve because of the greed of men." The following harvest was meager. Debt clung to him like a shadow. His family survived on roasted maize and wild leaves, and even those were scarce. His children's ribs began to show. Amma's smiles grew fewer. In the village, whispers spread. Neighbors mocked him. "Kofi farms dust," they jeered. "Even weeds do not grow for him." His children were bullied at school, called the famine family. And though Kofi's hands remained strong, his spirit began to crack. One evening, he stood in his dying field. The sun dipped low, bathing the land in crimson light. His millet stalks were bent, wilted, lifeless. He dropped to his knees, his calloused hands sinking into the dry earth. "Maybe I should give up," he murmured. "Maybe God has turned his face away." But then, in the distance, he heard the soft voice of his youngest daughter, Efua. She sang a hymn she had learned at church. Her voice was small, yet it carried. Faith the size of a mustard seed can move mountains. Tears filled Kofi's eyes. That night, in the cracked soil of his failing farm, he prayed the most desperate prayer of his life. Lord, this is my last prayer. If you do not answer, I will lay down my hope forever. But if you hear me, show me a way, not just for me, but for every hungry soul who waits for rain that does not come. The night was silent. No thunder rolled, no lightning split the sky. Yet in Kofi's heart, something stirred, a whisper, an idea, the faintest flicker of hope. And so begins the story of a farmer who dared to pray one last time, and how that prayer would change not just his family, but an entire people. The answer to Kofi's prayer did not come as a miracle falling from the sky. It came as a whisper of memory, a single sentence from a workshop he once attended in Tamale. The future of farming is not only in planting seeds, but in adding value to what you harvest. That thought lingered in his mind like a seed waiting for rain. Adding value. What if the little he had could be transformed into something greater? Kofi had almost nothing left in savings, but with Amma's encouragement, he took a risk. He bought a small second-hand grinding machine. It was old, its metal parts rusted in places, but it worked. For the first time, instead of selling raw ground nuts, Kofi roasted and ground them into a smooth, rich paste. Amma filled small jars and labeled them simply, pure groundnut butter. When Kofi carried them to the market, the other farmers laughed. Groundnut butter? Who will buy such things from a man who cannot even feed his family? One scoffed. But a few curious women bought jars, drawn by Amma's warm smile and the promise of something different. They tasted it. It was thick, natural, untainted by chemicals. Within a week, those women returned for more, and they brought their friends. Something small had begun. Kofi and Amma worked late into the night, roasting nuts over a wood fire, grinding, stirring, filling jars. Their children helped too, cleaning bottles, sticking labels. What was once a farm of despair had become a workshop of possibility. Encouraged by the success of the groundnut paste, Kofi turned to maize. Instead of selling it raw, he roasted it and ground it into flour for porridge. Mothers loved it. It cooked quickly, was filling, and tasted better than anything in the market. Again, demand grew. The same neighbors who once mocked him began to look at him differently. Some bought from him in secret, unwilling to admit they admired his persistence. Others continued to sneer, whispering that Kofi was chasing illusions. But he no longer listened. The ridicule no longer pierced him as it once had, for he saw something others could not, the faint glimmer of a new future. Week by week, his jars sold out faster. Traders began asking for larger quantities. Schools requested bulk orders of his porridge flour. Soon, the grinding machine could not keep up. What began as survival was turning into a business. Kofi gave it a name, Harvest Faith Foods. To him, it was more than a company. It was an altar of gratitude, a testimony that faith, even as small as a mustard seed, could turn dust into bread. By the second year, Kofi hired 2 young men from the village to help him. Ironically, they were among those who once ridiculed him. Now they worked beside him, grinding, packaging, and delivering. Jobs were being created where once there had been only despair. One evening, as Amma watched their children eat bowls of porridge made from their own maize flour, she smiled at Kofi. Do you see? Your last prayer was not the end. It was the beginning. Kofi looked at his children's full bowls and nodded. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of shame lifting. The land had not defeated him. He had found another way to harvest hope. And this was only the beginning of a greater harvest to come. Harvest Faith Foods grew like a tree planted beside a river. What began as a few jars of groundnut paste and maize flour soon became a lifeline for many. Kofi expanded his product line, adding soy flour, roasted maize snacks, and nutrient-rich porridge mixes designed for children. Each product carried the same mark: natural, local, and honest. Word spread quickly. Schools signed contracts for steady supplies. Churches placed bulk orders for feeding programs. Local shops began stocking Harvest Faith jars, and soon, trucks carried his products beyond the northern region into Kumasi and Accra. The farmer once mocked for farming dust now had his name on store shelves across Ghana. Kofi did not grow alone. He remembered his prayer, not just for me, but for every hungry soul. He began buying groundnuts, maize, and soybeans from other struggling farmers at fair prices. Many who had once been at the brink of starvation now found steady income. Fields that once yielded only despair now yielded hope. The small workshop expanded into a modest factory, then another. Within a decade, Kofi employed over 300 people. Young men and women who once loitered in idleness now found dignity in work. Amma oversaw quality in packaging, ensuring that every jar and every bag carried excellence. Their children, now grown, took part in the business, one in marketing, another in operations, the youngest in research, bringing new ideas to expand their reach. But success did not erase the scars of betrayal and ridicule. Kofi often remembered the cooperative leaders who had laughed at him. Ironically, some of them later came to sell their produce to Harvest Faith Foods. He treated them fairly, but he never forgot the sting of their mockery. Instead of bitterness, he used the memory as fuel, a reminder of where he had come from. Journalists began to take interest. Kofi was invited to conferences where he shared his story. He stood on stages, his voice calm yet powerful, telling leaders and fellow farmers alike, "The turning point was not when I made money. It was the night I prayed with nothing left." Sometimes God waits until we are empty so He can fill us with something new.